Materialism is based precisely on supersensory and, moreover, purely intellectual intuition, so that from this aspect my argument quite reveals its mythological dogmatic nature. In fact, what is materialism? As the word itself shows, matter must play a special role here. Which one? It must lie at the basis of every being, and all causes and root causes of life and world must be reduced to it. Good. But what is matter? Is it the same as material things? Of course, not the same. As a wooden cabinet is not a tree and as a printed book is not just paper, so a material thing is not just matter. But, maybe, matter is all things taken together? However, 1. We do not know all things taken together, and without knowing either their quantity or the quality of this sum, we cannot define matter by means of such obscure signs. 2. In addition, if one material thing is not simple matter, then all the things taken together, even if we accurately imagine this all, cannot be matter. If this steel pen is not just steel, then, taking all the feathers in the world, which exist, were, or will exist, we will get so many contradictory signs that the definition of steel with their help will become simply ridiculous. 3. Matter is not also the things that form the external world, for this would be the definition of one unknown through another unknown. What is the outside world? I see a tree in front of me. Is this the world or not? Obviously, this is a tree, not a world. Let's say it's part of the world. I see the moon. Is this the world? This is the moon, not the world, that is, in end case, part of the world, not the world. Further, I see the sun, mountains, rivers, people, animals, etc. Where is the world and how should I really imagine the world? Separate things are not the world, where is the world alone? In front of me is an immense number of parts of the world, where is the world itself as a whole? I do not see it, and the materialist does not point it out to me. But even if I saw the world as a whole, as a limited and definite body, just as ancient medieval thinkers saw it. But then it is already clear to the infant that the world as a whole is by no means the simple sum of its parts, and to see the tree, the moon, the sun, etc., does not mean to see the world. And besides that, the question of matter will then become completely confused, for it is not enough to speak not only about matter, but even about material things and even about their entire sum, if the question of the world as a whole is asked. So, matter is 1, neither a material thing, 2, nor their sum, mechanical or organic, 3, neither the external world as a whole. What else remains for materialists to say? They still say this: matter is what we perceive with external senses. Well, this definition is very interesting. It completely reveals the mythological dogmatic nature of materialism. Firstly, it is a helpless call to salvation through subjectivism. What is we and what are external senses? Every schoolboy knows that there was an endless chain of ascent of living beings and an infinitely diverse evolution of their sense organs. Where are you Darwinists? Each animal and each organ at each stage of its development corresponds to a certain perception and a certain picture of the external world. Where is the matter, which the materialists understand as something eternal and permanent? One picture of perception is in a spider, the other in a crab, the third in a fish, the fourth in a different mammals, the fifth in a human. One person can count hundreds and thousands of different types of perception, the sixth in those more perfect beings that are likely to evolve and who, perhaps, already exist on other planets. It is clear that the above definition of matter suffers from subjectivism, and hence, relativism, relying on coincidence and floundering in creeping and blind empiricism. In addition, and in essence, it is completely not true that matter is what we perceive with external senses. External senses do not perceive matter, but material things. We abstractly abstract matter from things like redness from red things, roundness from round things, etc. One cannot see redness as such, but only red things. Redness can only be thought abstractly, it is an abstract notion. Similarly, it is impossible to see, hear, or touch matter as such. This is an abstract notion. Matter can only be thought. However, What do we think about in the notion of matter? Perhaps, at least here is something connected with external senses? In other words, perhaps matter is an abstract notion of the connectedness of things with our external senses? It is not possible to agree with this either. In the notion of matter, nothing is actually thought subjectively, and even the materialists themselves maintain that matter is eternal and that it existed before life and living beings with all their perceptions and very organs. Hence, the indication of a connection with external feelings in no sense helps anything. In recent times, materialists have resorted simply to forgery. They declared matter nothing more than the principle of reality, and materialism is simply a doctrine of the objectivity of things and the world. Here, it only remains to spread your hands. If the matter of the thing is the reality of the thing and nothing more, then the materialists are also Plato, Aristotle and Plotinus, for they confessed the reality of the cosmos and even gave it a magnificent dialectic. The materialists are all the fathers of the Church, for they confessed the reality of God, the reality of the creation of the world, the reality of creation and the fall of man, the reality of Christ and the whole evangelical history, the reality of the death and salvation of people, etc. Thus, forgery is clearly revealed. Matter is not at all it's just a reality, but it's a specific reality. Which one? Of sensual things? But then again, there is a reliance on empirical sensualism and, consequently, relativism. All of the world? But then it is unclear what the world is for a materialist. And so on and so forth. In a word, all the previous difficulties here will only be repeated. Let us say that it is known from which things and from what exactly matter appears as a reality. But then again we will say that we do not see reality as such, we do not hear and do not perceive it, and that it, taken independently, is not a material thing, but an abstract concept. In this case, what does materialism have to do with it? Finally, I will not ditch myself in physical theories of matter. If I had brought here only one list of all theories of matter that only existed in physics, from the theory of a special liquid to the theory of complete and absolute annihilation of matter, then the reader would only feel dizziness. The study of the history of physics just shows that in materialism, it's not the thing in the scientific theory of matter, for such theories are dozens and they fly one by one like one-day moths. On this chaos, it is not possible to conceive that support and decisiveness that materialists manifest in their attack on people. From all this the conclusion follows itself. Matter taken in itself is an abstract notion, and materialism is the absolutization of an abstract notion, that is, a typical abstract metaphysics. In fact, a person has a lot of abstract notions, without which he cannot think of world and life. Matter is one of those, one of the most legitimate and necessary concepts of the human mind. Why should I pull out one notion from the whole dialectic system of all notions in general, put it at the center of everything and, in his name, call my whole philosophical system? All abstract concepts are equally absolute, and there is no logical reason to absolutize one of them to the detriment of another. Why on earth should I also call myself an idealist? If materialists claim the obviousness of the simple fact that everything is based on matter, and if matter is in fact no more than an abstract notion, then it is clear that materialism is based on a special kind of intellectual intuition, and that its outcome point is a special revelation of matter, just as there is a phenomenon of angels, a glowing cross in the sky, etc. I fully agree that to the materialists their revelation of the material absolute is very obvious and convincing, and I recognize for them their logical right to realize this experience and build its scientific system. But the materialists must also admit that, at the heart of their teachings are not logic and knowledge, but an immediate and, moreover, supersensual revelation, for matter, as we agreed, is not something sensual, that this revelation gives an experience that pretends to absolute exclusivity, that is, that this experience begins to flourish as a religious myth. And that this myth receives absolute affirmation in thought, that is, becomes a dogma. And this is the justification of the so-called dialectical materialism. In fact, if we take the point of view of pure dialectics, then, as I have shown, There is absolutely no way to absolutize the notion of matter like that. It turns out to be tantamount to every other, for all dialectical concepts, since they are derived dialectically, are in absolutely the same measure necessary, true, objective and absolute. And from this point of view, dialectical materialism is a glaring absurdity, a complete trampling of all dialectics and a typical bourgeois abstract metaphysics. But free dialectical materialism from the need to prove the primacy of faith, admit that he affirms his object, that is, the abstract concept of matter, as an absolute, and moreover as an absolute given in a special revelation that does not allow any criticism or doubt. Recognize that someone was the author of this revelation and faith and the founder of this only true myth. Let dialectics freely develop its categories, matter, spirit, etc., provided that there is already some indisputable absolute material reality, omnipresent, eternal, unchangeable, omnipotent, all good and all satisfying. Dialectical materialism will become a harmonious theory, and moreover a purely dialectical theory, no longer abstract, not metaphysical, just as dialectical and absolutely consistent as ancient and medieval Platonism, or as any dogmatic theology, since there is no question about the basis of its last object encompassed by faith alone, in the myth, as the supreme revelation. Why the myth about the omnipotence of knowledge or the primacy of matter doesn't look like a myth and is usually not treated as a myth by anyone. Myth, we said, is a personal being. And how is personal being understood in the new European era of individualism and bourgeois subjectivism? Exclusively, as a purely subjective being. Personality is not in the objective, for example, in the natural being. Materialism and atheism, as the children of bourgeois culture, understand, by virtue of this, nature as an impersonal mechanism, and therefore cannot take nature personally. The mechanism is simply a mechanism and nothing more. Of course, if the mechanism is understood as a mechanism, as a pure mechanism, this again will not be a mythology, as neither is mythology Euclidean geometry, nor a pure dialectic or syllogistics. But is the materialistic worldview only a pure mechanism? Is it only about a certain logical category, built exclusively by means of pure reason? Of course not. It hypostates, reifies, absolutes the mechanism, deifies it, puts it in the place of everything. In this case they must, if only they want to be logically consistent, understand the mechanistic world personally. Because personality is one of the most ordinary categories of human consciousness, like the categories of time, space, causality, etc. In particular, dialectical materialists should know this well. So, personality is a necessary category among others. Faith, however, forces us to assert that in fact there is only matter and matter controls everything. Where to put the category of personality? Therefore it's clearly that a consistent materialist, and in particular a dialectical materialist, as not afraid of deriving any categories, must understand matter and person, in terms of the category of personality. I have already pointed out that this is not at all equivalent to personifying or reviving matter. For in myth and magic does not become anything revived, although only his personal interpretation can transform this purely botanical specimen into the heritage of mythical consciousness. But in addition to revival and personification, matter, under conditions of personal interpretation, already ceases to be an innocent logical category. It becomes the eyeless, black, dead, heavy monster, which, despite its death, still rules the whole world. Matter cannot be revived. But the creed forces us to assert that there is nothing at all, except matter. If so, then it is clear that matter is death. By this I do not want to say that matter as such, pure matter, is death. Not at all. I have already said many times that matter as such, pure matter, is only one of the most ordinary abstractions of the human mind. It is not death, but an abstract concept. However, a materialist cannot and does not even have the right to speak of matter only as such, that is, only as an abstract concept. He must absolutize it, that is, present it in the form of the only possible absolute being. But as soon as we allow this, so immediately matter turns into an universal dead monster, which, being a death, nevertheless manages everything. Allow, why dead, why monster, the materialist will ask. Because I have nowhere to put the category of personality and category of life. Because these two categories are absolutely inevitable, absolutely natural and, I would say, completely banal property of all living experience and all dialectical thought. Where can I put these categories? If the religious education of materialism allowed the life and personality to be based on being, then I could not talk about death or the monster, but then materialism would cease to be materialism. Materialism, however, asserts that everything is ultimately governed by matter and is reduced to matter. In this case everything is controlled by a dead corpse and reduced to it. Here, then, is the central and main object of materialistic religious education and a purely logical necessity to think about the category of personality and life, for if I said monster and death, then I already used the categories of personality and life. Here, with full conviction, the whole need to understand materialism precisely as a special kind of mythology and as a kind of special dogmatic theology becomes clear. The fact that usually materialism is understood differently, testifies only to bourgeois individualism and liberal subjectivism, which is finally incapable of understanding myth as an objective category and which is equally characteristic of both ordinary critics of materialism and of materialism itself. The dead and blind universe monster, that's the whole personality, that's all the living and that's the whole story of a living personality, to which materialism alone is capable. This is his complete originality and complete irreducibility to other worldviews. Science is not a trait of materialism. Idealists also develop and create science, and the scientific nature of the constructions entices them no less than the materialists. Realism, vitality, practice, and other principles are also not characteristic of materialism. These are purely religious categories, and every religious person also wants to establish himself only on a truly real being, only on life experience, and is also forbidden to him to be a mere theoretician and to neglect practice, the vital realization of his ideals. Even the call to earthly life is not characteristic of materialism, since all paganism is also nothing but praise to the earth, flesh, earthly joys and consolations, and paganism is mysticism. The only and exceptional original creativity of the new European materialism lies precisely in the myth of the universal dead Leviathan, which, and in this is the materialistic confession of the miracle, is embodied in the real things of the world, dies in them, to then again rise again and ascend to the black sky of a dead and dull dream without dreams and without any signs of life. After all, this is a true miracle, the emergence of things from matter. Take a few wooden boards, on none of them there is exactly any sign of the table. How does the table or cabinet appear? They say, from the combination of boards and sticks. But wasn't there the closet in one board or in a single stick? You do not have a penny in your pocket, and I do not have a penny in my pocket. How will a penny suddenly appear if we join our pockets? It is clear that a miracle must be performed. Materialists believe in a miraculous, supernatural incarnation, just not of son, but for now only some deaf and blind mother, matter embodied in some clear and meaningful word, into real things, whereby the materialistic dogma demands that there be force and matter, so that there is movement, and not just dead things. Some even define a materialistic dialectic as the science of the general laws of motion, just as in the Christianity the incarnate Word of God promises to send and sends a consolation, the Spirit of truth that comes from the Father, so that he will give the divine forces for life, preaching, creativity and movement. Thus the materialist doctrine of matter, the laws of nature, acting in things, and movement is the degeneration of the Christian doctrine of the Trinitarian God and the incarnation of the Son of God, a degeneracy to the same extent as mythological and dogmatic as any religious dogma. I think it is hardly worthwhile to discover here the bourgeois nature of materialism. Materialism is based on the dominance of abstract functions of the human mind, whose products are projected outwardly and in such an abstract form are absolutized. Especially disgusting, and in itself and as a monkey of Christianity, is that scientific materialism, which is widely used in a talentless crowd of physicists, chemists, all natural scientists and physicians, on which they want to base the entire worldview. This is not even the bourgeois, but a petty bourgeois ideology, a philosophy of small, gray, stale, miserly, not gifted souls, all those nauseating haze of small and cold egoists in relation to who you reluctantly acknowledge the Russian Revolution not only fair but also not enough. Scientific positivism and empiricism, like all this stupid exaltation of science as an absolutely free and independent knowledge, is nothing but the last Philistine corruption and stupefying of the spirit, as a genuine, in the exact sociological sense, petty bourgeois ideology. This lousy petty miser wants to conquer the world with his insignificant proprietary whim. To do this, he thinks of the world as a soulless, mechanically moving cattle. He would not dare to assign another world to himself, and for this he thinks of himself as a good banker who, only through some mathematical calculations, takes possession of living people and living labor. Another notion of himself would not allow a person to be a materialist. However, I will leave the word to a person who has also experienced this Philistine scientific all around very well, terrible, rough, sticky, dirty, tough, blunt, always ugly, slow-tearing, petty, dishonest, slippery, shameful, low, tight, publicly satisfied, secretly lascivious, flat and funny and sickening, cowardly, viscous, marshy and stagnantly stagnant, life and death equally unworthy, slavish, boorish, purulent, black, occasionally gray, in gray, stubborn, ever lying, devilish, stagnant, stupid, dull, sleepy, cadaveric, cold, miserable, insignificant, unbearable, false. But no complaints. What is the joy in weeping? We know, everything will be different. Zinada, Gypius. This is the face of all positivism, no matter how scientific, logical, phenomenological and philosophical arguments it uses.